Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for watching, and thank you very much for being in this training. My name is Osama Salem, as you know, and I greet you from Berlin. Today, we will have a lecture on Unit 3, which is to talk about meaningful refugee participation. This is one lecture about refugee participation, and in Unit 4, we will have more about meaningful refugee participation to complete this concept. So let's start with, I like to use this photo. This is from 2018, the UNHCR NGO consultations, where for a very first time, refugees were very present there. And this happened right after the first refugee forum that I was part of organizing. And you see in the picture, in the podium, Mr. Adam Elsod. If you recognize him, he's one of the guest speakers in this training. You might have watched his video already. When he was on the podium, Adam was asked by the audience, how do you perceive the need of annual consultations of refugees sponsored by UNHCR as a tool to guarantee the effective participation of refugees? And Adam answered, not in these exact words, but in this meaning and spirit, that it's a tool, but it will stay a tool. It will stay only a tool if it's not perceived or become meaningful and political participation. And basically, this is the core point of our lecture today, is the participation becomes meaningless, actually harmful, if it's not meaningful. And as Adam puts it, every participation is political. So just to also talk a bit more about participation from an individual point of view. I met Hassan in a small city in Germany in 2015. And Hassan came from a very good family. He was financially well off. He was a doctor. He spoke German before arriving to Germany. He dressed nicely. And he did not come through the back doors of Europe. He flew to Germany. He had a visa. And when he arrived, and a few weeks later, a lot of refugees starting coming to Europe through the Balkan route and Mediterranean, everybody wanted to talk to Hassan. All political parties in that city, the mayor, and he became a superstar of that city. But the truth is, Hassan was, or the media was portraying Hassan as the refugee and how refugees should look like. And he also was enjoying being representative, as he called himself. But the truth is, Hassan inflicted a lot of harm to a lot of refugees because he did not have the knowledge and he did not have the experience. He did not have that exactly lived experience. He was not qualified to talk about the dangers of the route. But he was telling his story and he was cooking with people. But in my opinion, he harmed the cause of refugees. He inflicted, unintentionally, of course, serious damage to advocacy in this field. And this is more an individual perception or individual causality of meaningless refugee participation. So to talk more about institutional power, the other coin of participation, this is a little bit about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Article 14 of Universal Declaration of Human Rights grants people the asylum as a human right. Originally, when they were wording the declaration, part of that article was saying in these words, providing refugees with the right to seek and receive asylum. But this wording was objected by Saudi Arabia and the UK, and because they are powerful, and because there was very few advocacy there to keep it that way, it changed to a new article or new wording, which said the right to seek and to enjoy in other countries asylum from persecution. So they added in other countries, so pushing the responsibility to other countries, and they added the persecution to make it conditional. Those of you who have background in law would understand very well how this changed and affected in the future. But basically, states are able to push their own wording the way it suits them best. Now, just to talk a bit very quickly about the goals of this lecture, we will try to answer the question, why refugee, let's call it political participation, because indeed participation in this field is political. And what is the history of refugee participation, the recent and the current? How did it develop to its current form? What is its current form? What are the main challenges at the current form of refugee participation? We'll focus on that a bit. How do we overcome these challenges, and what's coming next? So why refugee participation? This is, I think it's an important question to ask ourselves, especially when you're sitting somewhere with the policymakers. And why meaningful refugee participation? So there are four main reasons. I'm sure there are more reasons the more we think about it, but I'll put it here as four main reasons. Reason number one, the numbers. What is called in some literature the refugee nation. The recent UNHCR Global Trends talks about over 100 million displaced people on the planet. We're talking about this internally displaced persons, stateless people, refugees, and asylum seekers. 100 million. Now imagine Germany is 82 million people. Imagine the population of Germany, no one is able to vote or take a decision or contribute to political decisions or policies. Now, why out of all these refugees, they cannot form a council, or they cannot have to be part of the decision-making process? They are a very large number. So this is one reason. The next reason is firsthand and the lived experience of refugees. It is self-evident that the displaced people are the only one who can tell about their experience, their problems, their issues, and solutions. Even within the displaced group itself, as we saw with Hassan, although he was recognized as a refugee later on, a surplus refugee, he did not have the experience that the politicians were asking him about. So refugees or advocates who have that experience, who lived it firsthand and lived through a long time of it, they are able to provide this, and they should be the only one who are able to provide this. Now, the third reason is the agency of refugee and self-decision. Just like any other group in the world, refugees have agency. They are a group, and they should be able to be part of the decision that control or governs their own present and future. UNHCR calls itself today the refugee agency. But show me more meaningful refugee participation within the decisions that are being taken by UNHCR. And the fourth reason is there is a need by governments and organizations to have refugee feedback, their refugee opinion on the table. Now, this is a very slippery slope because the governments would love to have more feedback, but not give anything back. So this is your role as advocates, to place yourself in a way where you are an important part of the decision-making process, but not a tokenized one. And we will see later on when we talk a bit about the ladder of participation, how this looks like. So the history of refugee participation in Geneva, or in general. So before 2006, there was very little refugee and migration participation in global forums or conferences and decision-making processes. But something happened in 2006. In 2006, Kofi Annan, the former Secretary General of the United Nations, appointed Peter Sutherland, a very respectful politician that was very well connected, he appointed him to be in charge of preparing the migration agenda and the debates on migration. Basically, Kofi Annan wanted to bring the UN to the migration discussion. At that point, the UN was not involved in international migration. And I'm talking here about migration, not refugees and refugee protection. Peter Sutherland had a very smart idea to create the Global Forum on Migration and Development, which is a forum where member states, so countries, meet to discuss migration. Up to the year 2010, the governments never talked about the rights of migrants, the human rights. They talked about technicalities. In 2010, when Mexico hosted the forum, and it was up to states who are hosting the forum to decide the agenda, they brought on the agenda the human rights of migrants. And they also invited NGOs, they invited some migrants for the discussion. This was a very powerful breaking point or tipping point because first of all, it tested states to see how they will react to this. And although some states probably were against this, but they could not participate. And since that year, NGOs and some migrant organizations became part of the global forum that is taking place every year. Now, in 2016, with the New York summit, refugees and migrants were not really present in the New York summit itself. You could count them on one hand. And because of the lack of that participation, and because the New York summit called to have the two global compacts and provided a certain period of time to draft those two compacts, there was a very powerful and important momentum in that time. That was the time to come up with groups of people, discussions, refugees together to provide this feedback, because we had that chance. So together with a group of refugees that I knew, also refugees that I did not know before, but we connected. We created or co-founded a network which was called Network for Refugee Voices, which had was able to connect with a lot of refugees around the world, bring a lot of opinions, attend a lot of meetings, advocate for refugee rights, advocate for solutions for root causes, and so on. Basically, we wanted to draw the main lines and the agenda of refugees within the Global Compact. Now, what the Network for Refugee Voices did best is the networking. It created multiple networks, and as part of these networks, a few movements came to existence. I was part of the steering committee that organized the first global summit of refugees in 2018. And I think that was a very powerful statement to the world to show that refugees alone did this, and we can do much, much better. Today, refugees attend global refugee forums, UNHCR NGO consultations, also with attendance of refugees. We see refugees within the ATCR, and so on. We also see our seat advocating and being able to place refugees in a meaningful participation way with the governments of Canada, Germany, USA. We will see it with New Zealand, Colombia, Kenya, maybe, and so on. So we see the refugee participation or meaningful one basically becoming more clear and clear in the last years, and especially because of the Global Compact, although the Global Compact could have been more ambitious towards refugees, but this is a very good start. So participation, what is participation? What's a meaningful participation? So we have two main categories. You might have seen this in some of the readings that we have. The informative, sorry, there's a misspelling. So informative participation or substantive participation. So the informative participation is what's also known as tokenized. It's when organizations or governments provide information on the basis of, by the way, this is what we will be doing. And also take information on the basis of, you know what, I heard you. But the substantive one it has power dynamics behind it. Substantive meaningful participation calls for partnership, becomes more focused on providing information, but also receiving results of it. Let's see it in a different way. Let's talk a bit about the Sherry Arnstein ladder of citizenship participation. She created this ladder to show the levels of participation, which makes it very clear to us how we can define it. So the ladder is 8 steps and 3 levels. So the levels, so the step number 1, which is under the non-participation level, which is also called the passive participation. So the manipulation and therapy, steps are, they aim to cure or educate participants about some of the topics, some of the issues. The starting point is that the proposed plan is obviously the best, and the job of participation is just to achieve public support through public relations. We can see this through petitions, social media likes, social media engagements, and so on. So organizations, when they provide something online and they receive thousands of likes and engagements, they take it as they did their job, they provided information, and they might consider this as a participatory approach, which is a very passive one. And this is more on the manipulation and the therapy steps. Now, when we come to the third step, which is informing, this falls under the degrees of tokenism. And now we're talking about the tokenism. So we have informing. We argue that this is an important first step towards legitimization, but actually we have to be careful. It's too often the emphasis is only on one-way channel of information. If this is not a dialogue between the participants or advocates and states or organizations, it defeats the purpose of having sitting together on one table, and becomes only one channel of feedback and good to know basis. And then we have the consultation, which is a vital step, and it moves beyond information sharing stage and a bit into the realm of involvement. It can include surveys, actual or virtual dialogues, neighborhood meetings, use of social media projects, as well as public inquiries. And then my personal favorite is placation. Placation is it's what we call what I really see tokenism embedded in it. So placation is a step where it's recognizable by many who have been involved in the community development and youth engagement. It relies heavily upon a small group of repeated players and members of societies or interested groups who have been picked as they are seen as a safe group to get involved. Often they have been handpicked by organizations or government because they are passive activists. So they choose them and they repeat them and they recycle them through different dialogues and discussions over and over and over again, because they know that they will not oppose and they are passive activists. And we see it today with some refugee advocates who might be attending all kinds of different forums with so many different topics, and they cover them all. So this is placation, and this is very common today. Now we start becoming serious when we enter the level of degrees of power, and that's partnership, for instance. Partnership is when advocates or organizations, refugee-led organizations or umbrella organizations become partners with let's say, for the sake of this discussion, with UNHCR or governments here. It redistributes the power through process of negotiation between refugees and power holders. It is a long-term commitment to a continued dialogue and offers a very clear and transparent process. Now, we become more serious when we are in the delegation level, which is a clear active participants. It's clear that active participants are involved with when you have the numbers, basically, when you become part of committees with delegated powers, when you become part of the budget review, and when you start having more accountability responsibilities. And finally, the last step of power is control. And this is degree of power, which guarantees that participants or residents can govern a program or an institution in full charge of policy, managerial aspects, and be able to negotiate conditions and be responsible for the project itself all the way through. So this is the ladder that we're talking about. And this is when we are part of advocacy, when we are participating, ask yourself, where are you? It is very important to understand where you are. And if you think you are in the tokenized part, be aware that you might be inflicting harm to other refugees. The main goal of meaningful refugee participation is to be aware that we are powerful and irreplaceable, and to move forward up the ladder to the degrees of power. Now let's talk a bit about the challenges that we see in refugee participation, which also leads a bit to the ladder that we're talking about, and it creates that tokenized dynamic. When governments, organizations, the UN, you call it, you name it, calls for participation, often we have people, actually very often you have people who, for instance, don't have documentation. They don't have the necessary documentation to travel, or the visa, or they cannot provide anything to even prove their identity. So it becomes apparent that those who fulfill this certain conditions will be the ones that will be placated the whole time, because if you don't have documentation, you cannot participate in a global forum. You cannot go to Geneva. It's obvious. Nobody provides documentation for that purpose. Another factor or another challenge is language. If you don't speak the language, there are very few opportunities where they will provide translation services. Organizations often choose the easiest way. Why would they invite or have somebody with a different language when they can have somebody who can speak the language? Again, we end up with people who have documentation, visa, and speak English or French or Spanish, you name it. Then time. A lot of refugees don't have time because they're taking care of others. They're taking care of themselves. They're studying. There are so many other things, because time is money, and which leads us to the last one, funding. You need money. If you don't have money, you need to work, so you don't have time. So it becomes a vicious circle. So a lot of people cannot have any of these conditions or circumstances available to them. If you're missing one of them, you cannot be part of any participation. So again, we will end up with a group of people who have that, and if it's not connected to the fact that they are aware that their participation should be meaningful, it becomes very harmful. Now, what's the ultimate goal for meaningful refugee participation? Let's start with independent. To have a meaningful refugee participation, it's not enough to go to a forum or a meeting and talk about the 100 or 200 or 300 refugees that you know. It's also not suitable to bring your own story as a refugee as an example to have a solution for millions of people. It has to be more than that. So first of all, it has to be independent. Meaningful refugee participation must be independent. Independent from what? Independent from agendas, from organizations, from governments. It has to provide its own feedback, its own input. And once it does that, it leans more towards being democratic representation. When you are a democratic represented person, when you create a group where people can vote and have you choose you to represent them, even if they are 100 or 200, you become a representative of them. You have legitimacy to represent those people. Now, it's not enough, of course, one representing 300, 400, 500, 1,000 people, but you need multiple of those representing many others, just like a parliament model. So when you are a representative, you become accountable. Now it becomes too serious. When you represent and you sit in a meeting and you talk about livelihood in camps, and your suggestion become mainstreamed. If your suggestion hurt somebody else's livelihood, you are accountable for that. So the independence leads to democracy. The democracy leads to representation. Representation gives us accountability. And then all of this, we become legitimate. And when we are legitimate, this becomes a fully meaningful refugee participation when we go and talk about our experiences, the experience of those that we talk on their behalf, and so on. You probably saw in some of the literature the word tipping point. For those who know what tipping point is, I'm sorry that I will be repeating it. For those who don't, I will just talk about it very quickly. It's a social phenomenon. It was coined it was coined in the year 1950s and the 60s, which refers to everything change at once and in a big moment. In the 50s and 60s, when African American population started moving to live in suburbs, in white suburbs in the northwest of the US, social scientists started noticing change in the social structure, and also they started seeing some migration of white families out of these neighborhoods when the population of the African Americans started getting to 10% or so. So this is when the word tipping point came to exist. A tipping point is a social epidemic of some sort, and it has three main characteristics. It's contagiousness. It's usually a contagious movement. It's stickiness. So it's a sticky movement. So it sticks around, it stays. And the fact that the change comes from few. So you don't have to have a whole large of population doing the same thing. You only need a few people doing it, and it becomes a social epidemic. Now, the actors of the tipping point are also identified in the social sphere as Malcolm Gladwell wrote in his book. They are three main actors. And I'm saying this, I'm telling you about these actors because some of you are these actors. So you have the social connectors. It's a special kind of people who have the ability to connect everybody else. Usually you have some people who know a lot of people and they connect. Some of you are those social connectors. So social connectors are people who know people. And then the second group of people are maves. Mave is a word in Yiddish that means a person who knows a lot. So maves are people who have knowledge. Some of you also are maves. So if you have one person who is a social connector and a mave, then you have somebody who's very powerful, somebody who can bring this message forward, somebody who can have to make a change in the future. And the last group of person is what they call seller. And seller is somebody who can take the new network that the social connectors created and the information that the maves brought, and they put it together, and then it tips, the point tips, and then you have a change. And you will see, if you keep this in the back of your head, you will see some of your actions might be becoming contagious, to become more socially contagious. It sticks around, and then a change might happen at some point. So to conclude, the first conclusion is, how do we achieve all of that? How do we achieve the legitimacy that we talked about? How do we achieve the tipping point? How do we achieve meaningful refugee participation? It's simple. Play by the theory of change. The theory of change is the theory that tells us you need to identify your goal, and that's your utmost goal. And you walk backwards to see how you will achieve that goal. So the steps you will take must be in the direction of achieving that goal. If they don't achieve that goal, don't take that step. And then build structure on structures. To become this powerful, to become important to organizations, to UNHCR, to governments, you need to be powerful. If you're not powerful, you're not important. How do we become powerful? You build a structure on a structure. You create umbrellas. You become part of a group. You get the support of people behind you. And that becomes that makes you very powerful. Not you as a person, but you as an organization. And then unite, not fragment. So have a group of people standing behind each other, supporting each other, having a unified voice in some of the issues that we talk about. How do we achieve that? Create events, attend events, learn more, see the ultimate goals of the things that you're thinking about. What do governments want? What do organizations want? So that in that you become more and more with one voice. And then to become a driving and irreplaceable force. The information that you have is needed somewhere. And the power of connection that you have is irreplaceable. And everybody needs that. So be aware that you might have that and you have it. And don't make it become a tokenized or a token where states or organizations take it for granted. Again, become partners rather than a token. See what you are, what are you doing, where are you standing, why are you in a meeting, in that meeting, why are you in that training? Are you a token or are you a partner? And go from there. Go towards being a partner, toward active participation. And if it's a tokenized, there's no shame in saying no, I don't want to attend that. It's absolutely fine. It's actually better not to be tokenized, because again, if you're tokenized, you're hurting others. And be politically brave. Everybody is human. Mustafa Aliyo, in one of his guest speaking interview, said, everybody is human. And it's true. Don't be afraid of politicians. Be politically brave. Say what you want. And to continue, the second conclusion here is a bit of an example I like to bring to finalize this presentation. The city of Venice, you all know it, in Italy. City of Venice is formed by 118 small little islands. Beautiful city. If you haven't been there, go there. It was a major financial center and maritime power during Middle Ages and Renaissance. Nobody can deny that. Venice brought silk, spices, grains, and coffee to Europe, just to name a few. It brought a lot of products to Europe. Europe would look completely different today if Venice did not exist. It played a major role to make Europe what it is today, and arguably one of the most beautiful cities on earth. It was founded in the 2nd century BC, maybe some settlements a bit before, but the main foundation was around 2nd century BC. Venice was founded by refugees. Refugees who were living in the mainland escaped the the horrors of a war of the Germanic tribes and the collapse of the Roman Empire at that time. So they wanted to go and hide in refuge. So they went to this muddy place that they thought nobody will come to. So they founded the city, and it grew, and they became very powerful. And this is the power, the kind of power that I'm talking about. People came, they created something, it became irreplaceable, it became powerful, and it became the center and the heart and the gates of Europe, and it made Europe what it is today. And I'm not saying take Europe as an example, no. I'm saying take that determination and that power as an example. Thank you very much for listening today, and I'm really looking forward for our discussion. Thank you.